The text arrived at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, jarring me awake from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. My phone buzzed against the nightstand with that particular urgency that could only mean one thing: another family crisis that somehow required my immediate financial intervention. I squinted at the screen, my heart already sinking as I read the message from my sister Rebecca. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emergency. Tyler's bail is set at $15,000. Need it by morning or he goes to county. You're literally the only one who can help us right now. Please don't let your nephew down. I stared at those words until they blurred together. Tyler, my 19-year-old nephew, had been arrested for the third time this year. Each incident seemed to escalate, and each time the family turned to me with the same desperate plea and the same unspoken expectation that I would open my wallet without question. After all, I was the successful one. I was the problem solver. I was the safety net. But as I sat there in my darkened bedroom, something inside me finally cracked. Not broke, cracked, like the first hairline fracture in a dam that's been holding back years of pressure. Because this wasn't just about Tyler's latest mistake. This was about a pattern that had been building for so long I'd almost forgotten what normal looked like. My name is Victoria Chen, and until 6 months ago I thought being needed by my family was the same thing as being loved by them. I was 34 years old, a senior marketing director at a tech startup in Portland, Oregon, and apparently the designated financial lifeline for everyone who shared my last name. What I didn't realize until that night was that I wasn't their safety net. I was their enabler, and they weren't grateful for my help. They were entitled to it. The story really begins 3 years earlier when I first moved to Portland and landed my dream job at Innovate Tech Solutions. The salary was more than I'd ever imagined making, and for the first time in my adult life I felt like I could breathe. I had my own apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Columbia River. I had a car that didn't require constant repair. I had a savings account that actually grew instead of perpetually hovering near zero. But success, I learned, is like blood in the water when you come from a family that's always struggled financially. Within weeks of my first promotion, the requests started trickling in. Small amounts at first. My brother Marcus needed help with his car registration. My mother wanted assistance with a medical bill. Rebecca required a loan to cover her kids' school supplies. Each request came with a perfectly reasonable explanation and a promise to pay me back. I said yes every time. How could I not? These were the people who had raised me, supported me, believed in me when I was working 2 jobs to get through college. Helping family wasn't just the right thing to do. It was who I was. At least that's what I told myself as the requests grew larger and more frequent. Marcus was the first to cross the line from borrowing to expecting. It started when his girlfriend left him, and he couldn't make rent on their shared apartment. He needed $3,000 to avoid eviction, and of course he'd pay me back within 2 months. When 2 months became 4 and 4 became 8, I gently brought up the subject during Sunday dinner at our mother's house. "Oh, come on, Vic," he said, waving his fork dismissively. "You act like $3,000 is some huge amount to you now. You probably spend that much on shoes in a month." The comment stung, but not because it was true. It hurt, because of how casually he dismissed both the money and my right to expect its return. But I didn't push back. I laughed it off, made some joke about my budget, and changed the subject. After all, family harmony was more important than money, right? That became the template for every subsequent interaction. When Rebecca needed $5,000 for Tyler's rehab program, she promised it was an investment in his future. When my mother required $8,000 for home repairs after a storm damaged her roof, she reminded me how much she'd sacrificed to put me through school. When Marcus's business idea fell through and he needed $12,000 to avoid bankruptcy, he painted a picture of family loyalty versus corporate greed. Each time I transferred the money within hours of being out. Each time, I told myself this was temporary, that once they got back on their feet, things would return to normal. Each time, I ignored the growing resentment, building in my chest like a slow-burning fire. The breaking point should have come when Tyler was arrested for the second time. Rebecca called me from the police station, sobbing into the phone about how this was just a misunderstanding, how Tyler was a good kid who'd fallen in with the wrong crowd, how $7,000 for bail and a lawyer would set everything right. I was in the middle of preparing for the biggest presentation of my career, a pitch that could determine whether our startup secured the funding we desperately needed to expand. But I left work anyway. I drove to the bank, withdrew the money, and spent the rest of the day navigating the legal system to get my nephew released. The presentation went poorly. We didn't get the funding. My boss, Sarah, called me into her office the next day, with that particular expression that meant she was both disappointed and trying not to show it. "Victoria, I need to ask, is everything okay at home? This is the third time this month you've had to leave for a family emergency." I assured her everything was fine, that these were just temporary setbacks, that it wouldn't happen again, but even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. There would always be another emergency, another crisis, another reason why I needed to drop everything and rescue someone who should have been capable of rescuing themselves. That evening, I sat in my apartment looking out at the river and tried to calculate how much I'd given my family over the past 2 years. The number was staggering, close to $60,000. Money that could have been a down payment on a house, or invested for my retirement, or used to start my own business. Instead, it had disappeared into a black hole of poor decisions, lack of planning, and the kind of learned helplessness that comes from always having someone else solve your problems. But it wasn't just the money that was draining away, it was my energy, my focus, my sense of self-worth. I'd become so accustomed to being the family ATM that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be valued for anything else. When Rebecca called, it wasn't to ask how I was doing, or to share good news about her kids. When Marcus texted, it wasn't to invite me to dinner, or suggest we catch up. Every interaction had become transactional, and I was always the one paying. The pattern became even clearer during family gatherings. At Christmas dinner, Rebecca spent 20 minutes describing Tyler's latest expensive hobby, collecting vintage baseball cards. Marcus showed off his new motorcycle, explaining in detail how he'd found the perfect model at a dealership across town. My mother had redecorated her entire living room, complete with new furniture and professional artwork. Meanwhile, I sat at the table wearing the same dress I'd worn to every family event for the past year, because I'd been too busy funding everyone else's lifestyle to think about my own. When my cousin asked about my love life, I realized I hadn't been on a date in months. I'd turned down invitations, canceled plans, and prioritized family crises over my own happiness, so consistently that I'd forgotten what my own happiness even looked like. The wake-up call came in the form of a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd arrived early for Sunday dinner and was bringing groceries in from my car, when I heard voices through the kitchen window. Rebecca and Marcus were already inside, talking to our mother while she prepared the meal. "I don't know why Victoria's being so weird about money lately," Rebecca was saying. She questioned me for like 10 minutes about what Tyler needed the bail money for last month. Like, hello, it's your nephew. Since when do you need a detailed budget? "She's definitely getting stingy," Marcus agreed. "Remember when she used to just send money without all the third degree? Now she wants to know exactly what it's for and when she'll get it back. It's honestly kind of insulting." "Maybe success is going to her head," my mother chimed in. "You know how people change when they start making real money, they forget where they came from." I stood frozen beside my car, grocery bags cutting into my palms, as their words hit me like physical blows. Stingy, insulting, forgetting where I came from. These were the people I'd been supporting for years, and this was how they talked about me when they thought I couldn't hear. But the worst part wasn't the criticism, it was the casual entitlement underlying every word. They weren't grateful for my help. They were annoyed that I'd started asking questions. They didn't see me as generous. They saw me as an obligation that had become inconveniently demanding. In their minds, my money wasn't really mine. It was a family resource that I happened to control, and my reluctance to share it freely was a character flaw rather than a reasonable boundary. I stood there for another few minutes, listening to them plan how to approach me about Tyler's latest crisis. Apparently he'd been fired from his job at the grocery store for showing up late too many times, and Rebecca was worried about making rent without his contribution. They were strategizing the best way to ask me for help, discussing which approach would be most likely to succeed. "Just tell her it's for the kids," my mother suggested. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Victoria always says yes when it's about the kids, or we could make it sound like a loan, Marcus added. Even though we all know she never actually expects us to pay her back, the casual acknowledgement that they had no intention of repaying me was the final straw. I quietly loaded the groceries back into my car and drove home without going inside. That night, I sat down with my laptop and created a spreadsheet detailing every dollar I'd given to family members over the past 3 years. The total was even higher than I'd estimated, over $75,000, with not a single cent repaid. More importantly, I tracked the pattern of requests and realized they were escalating. What had started as emergency assistance had evolved into regular subsidies. Marcus now expected me to cover his business shortfalls every few months. Rebecca considered my help with Tyler's ongoing legal troubles a given. My mother had stopped even pretending that her requests were temporary loans. I was subsidizing their entire lifestyle, and they'd grown so comfortable with the arrangement that they now saw my money as an entitlement rather than a gift. Worse, they were actively resentful when I showed any hesitation about continuing to bankroll their poor decision. That's when the voice in my head spoke up for the first time. It wasn't dramatic or mystical, just a quiet, clear thought that cut through years of guilt and conditioning. You're not helping them, you're enabling them, and they're not grateful, they're addicted. The realization hit me like ice water. I'd been so focused on being the good daughter, the reliable sister, the successful family member who could solve everyone's problems, that I'd failed to notice I was actually making those problems worse. Every time I bailed Marcus out of a financial crisis, I removed the natural consequences that might have taught him to manage his money better. Every time I covered Tyler's legal fees, I prevented him from facing the reality of his choices. Every time I rescued my family from their poor decisions, I reinforced their belief that someone else would always be there to clean up their mistakes. I was enabling learned helplessness on a massive scale, and I'd been doing it for so long that they now saw my financial support as a right rather than a privilege. They weren't asking for help anymore, they were demanding it, and when I showed any sign of resistance, I became the problem. The phrase echoed in my mind as I stared at the spreadsheet. You're becoming a problem. That's exactly how they saw it. Not that their constant financial crises were the problem, or that their inability to live within their means was the problem, or that their expectation of endless bailouts was the problem. No, according to them, my growing reluctance to fund their lifestyle was the problem. Well, if I was the problem, then maybe it was time to solve it. The next morning, I called my financial advisor and scheduled an emergency meeting. Janet Morrison had been managing my investments for 2 years, and she'd watched with growing concern as I repeatedly pulled money out of my retirement accounts and savings to cover family expenses. Victoria, I have to ask, are you planning to continue supporting your family at this level indefinitely? She said, pulling up my financial statements on her computer, because at the current rate, you're going to jeopardize your own long-term security. I looked at the numbers she showed me, the retirement contributions I'd stopped making, the emergency fund I'd depleted, the investment opportunities I'd missed because my money was tied up in family bailout. For the first time, I saw my financial situation through objective eyes, and it was terrifying. What would happen if I stopped? I asked quietly. Stopped supporting them. Well, your savings rate would increase dramatically. You could fully fund your retirement accounts, build a proper emergency fund, maybe even start investing in some higher yield opportunities. She paused, studying my face. But that's not really what you're asking, is it? She was right. I wasn't asking about the financial implications. I was asking about the emotional ones. What would happen to my relationships with my family if I stopped being their financial safety net? Would they still want me around if I wasn't useful to them? Was their love conditional on my willingness to subsidize their lives? The questions terrified me because I already suspected the answers. That afternoon, I sat down and wrote out a plan, not just for my finances, but for my life. I was going to reclaim control over my money, my time, and my sense of self-worth. I was going to stop enabling my family's poor decisions, and start investing in my own future. And if they saw that as me becoming a problem, then I was going to solve that problem by removing myself from their access to my assets. The plan was simple in concept, but would be brutal in execution. I would stop giving money to family members, regardless of the emergency or the circumstance. I would redirect those funds toward my own goals, maxing out my retirement contributions, building a 6-month emergency fund, and investing in my professional development. Most importantly, I would stop prioritizing family crises over my own life and career. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew they would be angry, hurt, and confused. I knew they would try guilt, manipulation, and emotional blackmail to change my mind. But I also knew that continuing on the current path would destroy both my financial future and my sense of self. The voice in my head spoke up again, clearer and more confident this time. You can't save people from themselves, but you can save yourself from them. 3 days later, Tyler was arrested again, and Rebecca's text arrived at 3. This time, instead of reaching for my wallet, I reached for my phone and typed back a message that would change everything. I'm sorry this happened, but I won't be able to help with bail money. I hope you find another solution. I turned off my phone and went back to sleep. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without being woken by a family crisis. And when I woke up the next morning, instead of feeling guilty or anxious, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. But I knew the real battle was just beginning. The silence lasted exactly 18 hours. That's how long it took for my family to process the fact that I'd said no and mobilize their response. When my phone finally buzzed back to life, it wasn't just one message, it was an avalanche. Rebecca called first, her voice shaking with what I initially mistook for grief, but quickly recognized as rage. Victoria, what the hell is wrong with you? Tyler is sitting in a cell right now because you decided to suddenly grow a conscience. This isn't some stranger asking for money. This is your nephew. I listened to her voice crack on the word nephew, the way she emphasized it like it was supposed to unlock some automatic response in me. For years it had worked. The magic words were always the same: family, emergency, children. They were the skeleton keys that opened my wallet without question. I understand you're upset, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But I can't keep covering these situations. Can't or won't. The question came out like a slap. Because last I checked, you just bought yourself a new laptop and went to that expensive yoga retreat last month. Funny how you can afford luxuries for yourself but not help your family in crisis. The accusation hit exactly where she intended it to. My laptop had cost $800 money I'd saved for months, because my old one was literally falling apart. The yoga retreat had been a company-sponsored wellness weekend that cost me nothing. But Rebecca had a talent for twisting facts into weapons, and I felt the familiar wave of guilt washing over me. That's when the voice spoke up again, cutting through the manipulation like a blade through fog. Notice how she's making your completely reasonable boundaries about her feelings, instead of Tyler's choices. The clarity was startling. Rebecca wasn't calling because she was heartbroken about Tyler's situation. She was calling because my refusal to fix it threatened the entire system she'd built around my financial support. Tyler's arrest was just the trigger. The real crisis was that her personal ATM had suddenly stopped dispensing cash. Rebecca, Tyler is 19 years old. This is his 3rd arrest this year. At what point does he start facing consequences for his own decisions? Consequences. Her voice pitched higher. You want to talk about consequences? Fine. The consequence of you abandoning your family is that Tyler spends God knows how long in county lockup with actual criminals. The consequence is that he might get hurt, or worse. The consequence is that when something happens to him, it's going to be on your conscience forever. There it was, the emotional blackmail that had controlled me for years. Every family crisis became my responsibility. Every poor decision by someone else became my moral failing if I didn't fix it. The logic was brilliant in its simplicity. If I had the ability to help and chose not to, then I was personally accountable for every negative outcome that followed. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. I'm just not enabling this pattern anymore. Pattern? Rebecca's laugh was bitter and sharp. The pattern is that we're family, and family helps each other. But apparently you've gotten too good for that. Apparently we're not worth your precious money anymore. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone and wrestling with a familiar cocktail of guilt, anger, and confusion. Part of me wanted to call her back, to apologize, to transfer the money and restore the peace. It would be so easy, just a few taps on my banking app, and everything could go back to normal. But that voice in my head spoke up again. Normal was killing you slowly. Normal was bankrupting your future to subsidize their poor choices. Normal was not normal at all. 20 minutes later, Marcus called. His approach was different from Rebecca's emotional assault. He went straight for calculated manipulation. Hey sis, look, I get that you're trying to teach Tyler some kind of lesson here, but this isn't the way to do it. The kid's scared out of his mind right now, and Rebecca is having a complete breakdown. Mom's talking about borrowing against the house to get the bail money. The mention of our mother borrowing against her house sent ice through my veins. She was 62 years old, barely scraping by on a fixed income, and her home was the only asset she had. The idea that she would jeopardize her financial security because I'd finally set a boundary was both infuriating and heartbreaking. Mom shouldn't have to do that, I said carefully. No, she shouldn't. You should do it, like you always have. Come on, Vic. 15 grand is nothing to you. It's probably what you spend on groceries in 6 months. There was that casual dismissal of my money again, the assumption that because I earned more than they did, large amounts meant nothing to me. Marcus had no idea that $15,000 represented months of careful saving, or that I'd already given the family more than most people made in a year. Marcus, I can't keep doing this. Can't, or he was using Rebecca's script now, and I realized they'd probably coordinated their approach. Because here's what I don't understand. You make 6 figures a year. You live alone. You don't have kids. What exactly are you saving all that money for? The question revealed everything wrong with their perspective. They couldn't comprehend that I might have goals, dreams, or needs of my own that required financial planning. In their minds, my money existed in a vacuum, generated magically by my job, and available for redistribution to whoever needed it most, at any given moment. I'm saving for my future, I said simply. Your future? Marcus's voice took on a mocking tone. What future? You're 34 and single, Vic. You work all the time, you barely date, you live in that sterile apartment like some kind of robot. Maybe instead of hoarding money, you should think about what actually matters. Family. The personal attack was designed to hit where I was most vulnerable. Marcus knew exactly how to weaponize my insecurities about my social life, my relationship status, my work-focused lifestyle. He was essentially arguing that because I hadn't achieved certain traditional milestones, my financial goals were somehow less valid than their immediate ones. My future includes having enough money to retire someday, to buy a house, to maybe start a family of my own, I said, my voice getting stronger with each word. It includes not working until I'm 70, because I gave away my savings to fix other people's problems. Other people's problem. Marcus's voice turned cold. We're not other people, Victoria. We're your family, and families don't keep score. But that was exactly wrong. They did keep score, obsessively. They remembered every time I hesitated before saying yes, every question I asked about repayment, every moment when I showed anything less than enthusiastic willingness to open my wallet. They just didn't want me keeping score of how much I'd given versus how much I'd received. After Marcus hung up, I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 2 phone calls, I'd been accused of abandoning my family, growing too good for them, being selfish, and not understanding what really mattered in life. The message was clear. My refusal to fund Tyler's bail wasn't just disappointing, it was a moral failing that revealed fundamental flaws in my character. The attacks continued throughout the day. Rebecca texted updates about Tyler's condition in jail, each message designed to maximize my guilt. She described how scared he looked during her visit, how he was asking for me specifically, how he couldn't understand why his aunt would abandon him in his darkest hour. She sent photos of herself crying, of Tyler's girlfriend sobbing outside the courthouse, of the legal documents that detailed his charges. Marcus took a different approach, forwarding me articles about the dangers of county jail, statistics about assault rates, horror stories about young first-time offenders who were traumatized by their experience. Each article came with a brief message: this is what you're choosing for your nephew, or hope this is worth your principles. But it was my mother's call that nearly broke my resolve. Victoria, honey, I don't understand what's happened. Her voice was small and confused. the voice of someone genuinely hurt rather than strategically manipulating. Rebecca called me crying, saying, "You won't help Tyler. That doesn't sound like you, sweetheart. You've always been there for family." My mother was the one person in this entire situation whose motivations I didn't question. She wasn't manipulative or entitled. She was just genuinely concerned about her grandson, and confused by my sudden change in behavior, which made her disappointment so much harder to bear. "Mom, I know this is confusing, but I can't keep covering these situations. Tyler needs to face consequences for his choices, but he's just a boy, honey. Yes, he's made mistakes, but he's still learning. We all made mistakes at his age. Mom, he's 19, he's been arrested 3 times. At what point do we stop calling them mistakes and start calling them patterns?" There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was distant. "I don't know what happened to you, Victoria. You used to be so compassionate, so generous. Success must be changing you more than I realized." The accusation that success had corrupted me was the cruelest cut of all, because it came from the person whose opinion mattered most to me. My mother had worked 2 jobs to put me through college, had sacrificed her own dreams to support mine, had been nothing but proud of my achievements until this moment. Hearing disappointment in her voice felt like a physical pain in my chest. But even as guilt threatened to overwhelm me, that inner voice spoke up again. "She's been conditioned to see your boundaries as selfishness, because the system only works if you never say no. But her disappointment doesn't make you wrong." That evening I received a group text that included Rebecca, Marcus, my mother, and several cousins. The message was from Rebecca and had clearly been crafted for maximum impact. "Since Victoria has decided she's too successful to help family anymore, we need to figure out another way to get Tyler out of jail. Mom is looking into borrowing against her house. Marcus is going to ask his boss for an advance. Cousin Janet might be able to help with a few thousand. It's going to take all of us working together to make up for what one person could have solved with a simple bank transfer. But I guess that's what happens when money becomes more important than family." The message was a masterpiece of manipulation. It positioned me as the villain whose selfishness was forcing elderly mothers to jeopardize their homes, and working-class family members to beg their bosses for advance. It painted my boundary setting as greed, and their financial crisis as my moral failing. Most insidiously, it recruited the entire extended family as witnesses to my supposed heartlessness. The responses came quickly. Cousin Janet expressing shock that I wouldn't help Tyler. Uncle Robert saying he didn't understand how I could have changed so much. Cousin Michael offering to contribute what little he could despite his own struggles, making sure everyone knew he was willing to sacrifice when I wasn't. I stared at my phone as the messages accumulated, each one adding another layer of guilt and shame. They were creating a narrative where I was the family member who had forgotten her roots, who valued money over relationships, who had become so corrupted by success that she couldn't see what really mattered. The strategy was working. I could feel my resolve weakening with each accusatory message, each expression of disappointment, each reminder of how easy it would be to make this all go away. $15,000 to restore family harmony, to stop being the villain, to go back to being the generous sister and daughter everyone expected me to be. I was reaching for my phone to open my banking app when it rang. The caller ID showed Sarah Martinez, my boss at Innovate Tech Solutions. "Victoria, I'm sorry to call so late, but I wanted to give you a heads up about something. The board met today about the new VP of Marketing position, and your name came up." My hand froze halfway to the phone. The VP position was something I'd been working toward for 3 years. A role that would nearly double my salary and put me in charge of our entire marketing strategy. I'd assumed the position would go to someone with more seniority, but apparently my recent work had caught the board's attention. They were impressed with how you handled the Morrison campaign despite the personal challenges you were dealing with that week. Sarah continued. "They want to interview you next Friday. This is a real opportunity, Victoria. Don't let anything distract you from bringing your best." After she hung up, I sat in my living room staring out at the city lights and thinking about what Sarah had said. The Morrison campaign that had been the week of Tyler's second arrest, when I'd nearly missed the client presentation because I was dealing with his legal situation. I'd somehow managed to pull together a brilliant campaign despite the chaos, but it had cost me. I'd worked 18-hour days to make up for lost time, had survived on coffee and determination, had pushed myself to the edge of exhaustion, and now that exhaustion might pay off in the form of the biggest career opportunity of my life. The VP position would mean financial security beyond anything I'd ever imagined. It would mean influence, autonomy, the ability to shape strategy rather than just execute it. It would mean I could afford to buy a house, to travel, to build the kind of life I'd always dreamed of. But it would also mean continued high performance under pressure. It would mean being available for late-night strategy sessions and early morning client calls. It would mean having the mental clarity and emotional bandwidth to lead a team through complex challenges. It would mean not being constantly distracted by family crises that I was expected to solve with my checkbook. As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone buzzed with another message from Rebecca. Tyler called from jail. He's been crying for 2 hours. He keeps asking why Aunt Victoria doesn't love him anymore. He says he's sorry and he'll do better, but he needs to get out first. Please, Vic. He's just a kid who made a mistake. Don't let your pride destroy his future. I stared at the message until the words blurred together. Tyler crying in jail, asking why I didn't love him anymore. The image was designed to break me, to override every rational thought with pure emotional urgency. Rebecca knew exactly which strings to pull to make me doubt everything. But as I sat there wrestling with guilt and indecision, that voice in my head spoke up one more time, clearer and more insistent than ever. If you give in now, if you rescue him again, what will you be teaching him? That actions don't have consequences, that someone will always be there to fix his mistakes, that he never has to grow up because Aunt Victoria will always make his problems disappear. The questions cut through the emotional manipulation like a knife through silk, because the truth was, Tyler wasn't crying because I didn't love him. He was crying because for the first time in his life, he was facing the natural consequences of his choices without someone swooping in to make them disappear. The discomfort he was feeling wasn't punishment, it was the beginning of accountability. And Rebecca wasn't devastated because her son was suffering. She was panicked because the system that allowed her to avoid dealing with his problems was breaking down. She'd never had to confront Tyler's behavior patterns because I'd always been there to solve the immediate crisis. Remove me from the equation, and suddenly she was face to face with the reality of raising a teenager who'd never learned that actions have consequences. The thought crystallized into absolute clarity. I wasn't abandoning Tyler by refusing to bail him out. I was giving him the first real chance he'd ever had to learn from his mistakes. The jail cell wasn't the problem, it was the consequence that might finally motivate him to change his behavior. I turned off my phone and went to bed. Tomorrow, I would start preparing for the interview that could change my life. Tonight, I would sleep peacefully for the second night in a row, knowing that I was finally putting my own future first. But when I woke up the next morning, I discovered that my family's campaign against me had escalated far beyond anything I could have imagined. The first sign was my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, looking at me with obvious sympathy as I retrieved my newspaper. Victoria, dear, I'm so sorry to hear about your family troubles. If there's anything I can do to help. I stared at her, confused. Mrs. Patterson and I barely spoke beyond polite greetings. How could she possibly know about Tyler's arrest? The mystery was solved when I opened Facebook and saw that Rebecca had posted a long emotional status update that had been shared dozens of times. Heartbroken doesn't even begin to describe how I'm feeling right now. My beautiful 19-year-old son is sitting in jail because someone in our family has decided that money is more important than love. Tyler made a mistake. The kind of mistake any teenager might make, but instead of family support, he's facing this alone. I never thought I'd see the day when success would change someone so completely that they'd turn their back on their own nephew. Please keep Tyler in your prayers, and remember that money can't buy the kind of love and loyalty that real family provides. The post had 43 likes and 18 comments, all expressing sympathy for Rebecca and shock at my supposed heartlessness. Several mutual friends had commented with variations of "I can't believe Victoria would do this," and "family should always come first." Rebecca had skillfully avoided mentioning me by name while making it clear exactly who she was talking about, But the Facebook post was just the beginning. Over the next few hours, I discovered that Rebecca had launched a comprehensive social media campaign designed to pressure me into compliance. She'd posted photos of Tyler as a child, accompanied by captions about how he'd always looked up to his successful aunt. She'd shared old family photos of holiday gatherings, with comments about how money had apparently destroyed our once close family bond. Most devastatingly, she'd posted a video of herself crying while describing Tyler's phone call from jail. "He keeps asking what he did wrong," she sobbed into the camera. "He can't understand why the aunt who used to take him to baseball games and buy him birthday presents would abandon him when he needs her most. I don't know what to tell him. I don't know how to explain that success changes people." The video had been viewed over 200 times and shared across multiple family members' profiles. The comments were universally supportive of Rebecca and critical of me. People who barely knew Tyler were expressing outrage at my heartlessness. Family friends were sharing their own stories about the importance of supporting relatives in crisis. Marcus had joined the campaign with his own posts about family loyalty and the corrupting influence of money. He'd shared articles about the importance of helping family members in need, with captions that clearly referenced my situation without naming me directly. He'd posted photos of himself and Tyler fishing together, with comments about how some family bonds were apparently stronger than others. Even my cousin Janet had gotten involved, sharing a meme about how success should never make you forget where you came from. The message was subtle but clear. I had forgotten my roots and abandoned my values in pursuit of financial gain. The social media assault was brilliantly executed. By avoiding direct confrontation and instead appealing to universal values like family loyalty and compassion, they'd positioned themselves as the victims of my greed. They'd recruited an army of mutual friends and family members to pressure me into compliance, without those people fully understanding the context of my decision. More importantly, they'd made the conflict public in a way that threatened my professional reputation. My coworkers, clients, and industry contacts could all see these posts if they were connected to any of my family members on social media. The narrative they were spreading, that success had corrupted me and made me heartless toward family, was exactly the kind of character assassination that could damage my career prospects. The strategy was working. By lunchtime, I'd received 3 phone calls from family friends expressing concern about the situation. My college roommate had sent a confused text asking if everything was okay between me and Rebecca. My boss's assistant had given me a sympathetic look when I arrived at work, making me wonder if the drama had somehow reached the office. The pressure was overwhelming, and I could feel my resolve cracking under the weight of social disapproval. It would be so easy to make it all stop, just transfer the money, post a conciliatory message about the importance of family, and watch the narrative shift from criticism to celebration of my generosity. But as I sat in my office trying to focus on work while family drama exploded across social media, that inner voice spoke up again. "This is exactly why they've gotten away with this pattern for so long. They know how to make you the villain for having boundaries. They know how to weaponize other people's opinions against you. But giving in now will only prove that their tactics work." The voice was right. This social media campaign wasn't about Tyler or family loyalty. It was about control. They were demonstrating exactly what would happen if I continued to resist their demands: public humiliation, character assassination, and social pressure designed to force compliance. They were showing me that saying no to their financial requests would come with consequences far beyond family disappointment. But they'd also revealed something crucial about their strategy: it only worked if I cared more about public opinion than my own well-being. The entire campaign depended on my willingness to sacrifice my financial future to avoid social disapproval. They were betting that my fear of being seen as heartless would override my commitment to setting healthy boundaries. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of responding to their social media campaign or defending myself against their accusations, I did something they would never expect. I doubled down. I opened my laptop and began writing an email to my family that would end this pattern once and for all. The email I wrote that afternoon would become the document that saved my life, though I didn't realize it at the time. I spent 3 hours crafting it, deleting entire paragraphs, rewriting sections, making sure every word was deliberate and clear. When I finally hit send, my hands were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. The subject line read, regarding financial boundaries moving forward. Dear family, I began, I am writing to address the recent events surrounding Tyler's situation, and to establish clear boundaries regarding financial support going forward. After careful consideration, I have decided that I will no longer be providing financial assistance to family members, regardless of the circumstances. This decision is final and non-negotiable. I went on to explain that this wasn't about punishment or lack of love, but about enabling versus helping. I detailed how my constant financial interventions had prevented natural consequences that might have led to better decision-making. I pointed out that in 3 years, despite giving over $75,000 to various family members, the same problems kept recurring with increasing frequency and severity. Tyler has been arrested 3 times this year, I wrote. Each time I have provided bail money and legal fees. Each time, the family has assured me this was a learning experience that would lead to better choices. Instead, the problems have escalated. This pattern will continue as long as Tyler knows that someone else will always handle the consequences of his action. I addressed the social media campaign directly. I am aware of the posts and messages circulating about my decision. I understand that my choice to set financial boundaries is being portrayed as abandonment and heartlessness. However, I will not be manipulated into changing my position through public pressure or emotional blackmail. The most difficult part to write was the section about my mother. Mom, I know you're disappointed in me, and that breaks my heart, but I need you to understand that my unwillingness to continue funding these crises doesn't mean I don't love our family. It means I love Tyler enough to want him to develop into a responsible adult, which will never happen if someone is always rescuing him from his poor choices. I concluded with a statement that felt like jumping off a cliff. I will not be responding to future requests for financial assistance. I will not be engaging in arguments or negotiations about this decision. I will not be participating in family guilt or manipulation campaign. Anyone who cannot accept these boundaries is free to limit their contact with me accordingly. Before I could second-guess myself, I sent the email to everyone in my immediate family, then turned off my phone and went for a long walk through Portland's waterfront district. The response was immediate and nuclear. When I turned my phone back on 2 hours later, I had 37 missed calls and 82 text messages. Rebecca had called 14 times in the span of 20 minutes. Marcus had sent a series of increasingly hostile texts that devolved into outright threats. My mother had left 3 voicemails, each one more heartbroken than the last. The text from Rebecca that stopped me cold read, "Congratulations, Victoria. Tyler just tried to hurt himself in his cell. I hope your precious boundaries were worth it." My heart stopped. Despite everything, despite all the manipulation and entitlement, Tyler was still my nephew. The thought of him harming himself because of my decision sent waves of guilt crashing over me. I was reaching for my phone to call Rebecca when another text came through. This one from Marcus. "Nice job, sis. Kid's in the hospital now. Hope you can live with yourself." I sat down hard on a park bench, my vision blurring with tears. Had I pushed too hard? Had my need to set boundaries actually put Tyler in danger? Was Rebecca right, that my selfishness had led to this crisis? I was spiraling into panic when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. Thinking it might be the hospital, I answered immediately. "Miss Chen, this is Detective Maria Santos, with the Portland Police Department. I understand you're Tyler Morrison's aunt." My blood turned to ice. "Yes, is he okay? I heard he was in the hospital." "Ma'am, Tyler Morrison is fine. He's in county lockup on charges related to his arrest 3 days ago. I'm calling because we've received several reports of harassment directed at you from his family members, and I wanted to check on your safety." The world tilted sideways. "I'm sorry, your nephew is not in the hospital, ma'am. He hasn't been injured. We've received reports that his mother and uncle have been making false claims about his condition as part of what appears to be an ongoing harassment campaign against you. We're calling to verify your safety and to see if you want to file a formal complaint." I sat in stunned silence as Detective Santos explained that someone she wouldn't say who had contacted police after seeing the social media posts and messages, concerned that I was being subjected to coordinated harassment and false statements designed to cause emotional emotional distress. Tyler Morrison is currently in good health and scheduled for arraignment tomorrow morning, she continued. His mother and uncle have been informed that making false statements about someone's condition, for the purpose of emotional manipulation, could constitute harassment under Oregon state law. After the detective hung up, I stared at my phone in complete shock. Tyler was fine, he wasn't in the hospital, he hadn't hurt himself. The emotional emergency that had nearly broken my resolve was completely fabricated, a lie designed to force me back into compliance through manufactured crisis. The manipulation was so calculated, so coldly strategic, that it took my breath away. They had weaponized my genuine love and concern for Tyler, knowing that the threat of self-harm would override every rational boundary I'd established. They had counted on my guilt, my fear, my inability to risk someone's safety, even when I suspected manipulation. But they had underestimated one crucial factor. In their desperation to force my compliance, they had committed to a lie that could be easily verified, and someone, I still don't know who, had cared enough about my well-being to check on their claims. 20 minutes later, Rebecca called. Her voice was different now, not angry or manipulative, but scared. "Victoria, we need to talk, do we?" I asked, my voice colder than winter, because I just spoke with Detective Santos. "Tyler's fine, isn't he?" The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "How did you know to call the police?" "I didn't call them, Rebecca, someone else did. Someone who was concerned enough about your harassment campaign to report it." I paused, letting that sink in. "Someone who cared enough to fact-check your lies." "Victoria, please, you don't understand. We were desperate. Tyler really is struggling." And stop. The word came out with such force that it surprised even me. "Just stop. You told me Tyler tried to hurt himself. You told me he was in the hospital. You weaponized my love for that kid to try to manipulate me into giving you money. That's not desperation, Rebecca. That's calculated emotional abuse." "We're family," she protested, but the conviction was gone from her voice. "No," I said quietly. "Family doesn't lie about suicide attempts to manipulate each other. Family doesn't launch public humiliation campaigns to force compliance. Family doesn't threaten and harass someone for setting reasonable boundaries. What you've been doing isn't family, it's extortion." I hung up before she could respond, and for the first time since this entire crisis began, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete clarity about who my family really was. The next morning brought another surprise. I arrived at work to find Sarah waiting in my office, with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. "Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that your answer won't affect your interview tomorrow." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Are you dealing with some kind of family situation that might impact your ability to take on the VP role?" My heart sank. The social media campaign had reached my workplace after all. Someone had connected the dots between Rebecca's posts and my professional life, and now my career was in jeopardy because of their harassment campaign. "Sarah, I can explain." She held up a hand. "Let me finish. Yesterday afternoon, I received a very strange phone call from someone claiming to be your sister. She told me that you were having a family crisis and might not be emotionally stable enough for a promotion right now. She suggested that I should keep an eye on you because you were making poor decisions under stress." I stared at Sarah in horror. Rebecca had actually called my boss to sabotage my career. The manipulation had moved beyond social media and family pressure into direct professional interference. "The thing is," Sarah continued, "the woman who called didn't sound concerned about your well-being. She sounded like she was trying to damage your reputation. So I did some research." She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots of Rebecca's Facebook post. "This campaign against you started immediately after you refused to give someone money, didn't it?" I nodded, too shocked to speak. "Victoria, I've been managing people for 15 years. I know the difference between genuine family concern and manipulation. What your sister is doing isn't family support, it's harassment, designed to control your behavior." She leaned forward. "The question is, are you going to let them succeed?" That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls that changed everything. The first was to my financial advisor. "Janet, I need you to help me restructure my accounts. I want to make it impossible for me to transfer large amounts of money without a 48-hour waiting period, and your approval as a secondary authorization. Victoria, that's pretty extreme. Are you sure? I need you to help me protect my assets from my own family. The second call was to a lawyer who specialized in family law and estate planning. I explained the harassment campaign, the false statements about Tyler's condition, and the attempts to sabotage my career. Ms. Chen, what you're describing could constitute several forms of legal harassment. We can draft cease and desist letters, and if necessary pursue restraining orders. But, I also strongly recommend that you consider removing these family members from any financial accounts, insurance policies, or estate documents they might have access to. The third call was the hardest. I dialed my mother's number and waited through 4 rings before she answered. Victoria, her voice was small and uncertain. Mom, I need to ask you something directly. Did you know that Rebecca lied about Tyler being in the hospital? Another long silence, then, barely audible, yes. The admission hit me like a physical blow. My mother, the person I trusted most in the world, the person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's, had been complicit in the lie designed to manipulate me. Did you know she called my boss to try to sabotage my career? She said she was worried about you. She said success was changing you and someone needed to intervene. Mom, do you understand what you're saying? You're telling me that you supported Rebecca lying about Tyler's safety and interfering with my job because you disagreed with my decision to stop giving her money. Victoria, honey, I know you think you're doing the right thing, but families take care of each other. That's how I raised you. No, Mom, you raised me to be honest, to work hard and to treat people with respect. You didn't raise me to be manipulated and lied to. You didn't raise me to sacrifice my future for other people's poor choices. When she spoke again, her voice was defensive. You have so much, Victoria, more than the rest of us will ever have. Is it really so wrong for family to ask for help when they need it? Asking for help isn't wrong. Lying, manipulating, harassing and sabotaging someone's career when they say no, that's wrong, and the fact that you can't see the difference breaks my heart. I hung up and sat in my kitchen as darkness fell over Portland, processing the reality that my entire family had been complicit in a systematic campaign to control my behavior through manipulation and lies. Not just Rebecca and Marcus, but my mother too. The person I'd thought was simply misguided had actually been an active participant in their strategy. That night I wrote another email. This one was shorter and more definitive, based on recent events, including false statements about Tyler's health, attempts to sabotage my career, and ongoing harassment designed to force my compliance. I am formally ceasing all contact with Rebecca Morrison and Marcus. I am also establishing firm boundaries with all family members going forward. I will not be attending family gatherings, participating in group communications, or maintaining relationships with anyone who supports or enables the harassment I have experienced. This decision is fine. I sent the email, then blocked Rebecca and Marcus on all social media platforms, blocked their phone numbers, and changed my address with all financial institutions to ensure they couldn't access any information about my account. The next morning, I walked into my interview for the VP position with complete mental clarity for the first time in years, without the constant background stress of family drama and financial manipulation. I felt sharper, more confident, more genuinely myself than I'd been in decades. The interview went perfectly. I presented a 5-year strategic plan that impressed the entire board, discussed market opportunities with the kind of detailed knowledge that only came from not being constantly distracted by family crises, and answered every question with the confidence of someone who had finally learned to prioritize her own goals. I got the promotion. The salary increase was substantial enough that I could max out my retirement contributions, build a 6-month emergency fund, and still have money left over for the life I'd always wanted to build. For the first time since college, I was financially planning for my own future instead of subsidizing other people's mistakes. But the real change wasn't financial, it was psychological. Without the constant drain of family manipulation, I had energy for other relationships. I started dating again, made new friends, took up hobbies I'd abandoned during the years of family crisis management. I discovered that I was actually a pretty interesting person when I wasn't constantly exhausted from managing other people's problems. 6 months later, Rebecca found me. I was leaving a yoga class downtown when she stepped out from behind a parked car,
looking thinner and older than I remembered. She'd clearly been waiting for me, which meant she'd been tracking my schedule somehow. "Victoria, please, just give me 5 minutes." I looked at her for a long moment, noting the designer purse she carried despite supposedly being in financial crisis, the expensive highlights in her hair, the new shoes that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. "What do you want, Rebecca? I want to apologize. I know we made mistakes. I know we pushed too hard, but Tyler's doing better now. He's in a program, he's getting help, he's learned from his mistakes." I waited, knowing there was more. "The thing is, he really wants to see you. He asks about you all the time." And I thought maybe, now that some time has passed, we could work things out, start fresh. "Are you asking me for money?" She looked genuinely offended. "No, God, Victoria, is that what you think of me? This is about family. This is about Tyler missing his aunt." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, waiting for the request I knew was coming. "Although," she continued, "and there it was, Tyler is applying to colleges now, and the application fees are pretty expensive, and then there's the cost of tuition to think about. I mean, you're doing so well now with your promotion and everything. I just thought maybe you'd want to invest in his future." The audacity was breathtaking. After months of harassment, lies about suicide attempts to sabotage my career, and coordinated family pressure campaigns, she was standing in front of me asking for college money, not even asking, assuming, expecting, as if the previous 6 months had been a minor disagreement, rather than a systematic campaign of emotional abuse. "Rebecca, let me ask you something. Do you actually believe Tyler is ready for college?" "Of course he is. He's smart. He just made some mistake. He was arrested 3 times in 6 months. Has he held a job for longer than a month? Has he completed any kind of substance abuse program? Has he made any attempt to pay back the money I spent on his previous legal fees?" Her face flushed. "You're being ridiculous. Those are completely different issues." "No, they're not. College requires responsibility, time management, the ability to handle freedom without making destructive choices."
Tyler hasn't demonstrated any of those qualities. Sending him to college right now would be like giving a sports car to someone who keeps crashing bicycles. "So you're saying he doesn't deserve a chance at education?" "I'm saying that until he proves he can handle basic adult responsibilities, college would be a waste of everyone's time and money." I paused, watching her face cycle through anger, disbelief, and calculation. "But that's not really what this is about, is it? What do you mean you're not here because Tyler is ready for college? You're here because you've run out of other options. The family members who were so supportive of your harassment campaign, have they stepped up to fund Tyler's education? Has Marcus offered to co-sign student loans? Has Mom volunteered to help with application fees?" Rebecca's silence was answer enough. "Let me guess," I continued. "It turned out that publicly shaming me for not giving you money didn't actually solve your financial problem. And now that Tyler's legal situations have been resolved, probably through public defender services rather than expensive private attorneys, you need money for something new. Tyler is your nephew," she said, falling back on the old script. "Don't you want him to succeed? I want Tyler to develop into a functioning adult. That will never happen as long as someone else is always solving his problems and funding his lifestyle." I looked directly into her eyes, "and it will definitely never happen as long as his mother thinks lying about suicide attempts is an acceptable way to manipulate people." Rebecca's face went pale. "You were desperate, so you decided to traumatize me with false reports about my nephew's safety. You thought emotional terrorism was an appropriate response to someone setting financial boundaries." "We're family," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her. "No, Rebecca, we share DNA, but we are not family. Family members don't lie to each other about medical emergencies. Family members don't try to sabotage each other's careers. Family members don't launch harassment campaigns when someone says no to a financial request." I took a step back. "You taught me something important about the difference between family and relatives. Thank you for that lesson." I walked away, leaving her standing on the sidewalk. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood, complete peace about a family interaction. The attempts to re-establish contact continued sporadically over the following months. Marcus sent occasional texts that alternated between apologies and accusations. My mother called every few weeks with updates about Tyler's progress, always ending with subtle suggestions that I should consider resuming financial support. Extended family members reached out periodically, usually with some version of "don't you think it's time to forgive and forget?" But I had learned to recognize manipulation in all its forms. The apologies were always followed by requests. The updates about Tyler's progress were always designed to make me feel guilty for not contributing to his success. The calls for forgiveness were always about restoring my access to their financial problems, never about acknowledging the harm they had caused me. A year after cutting contact, I received a wedding invitation. Tyler was getting married to his longtime girlfriend, and Rebecca had included a handwritten note. "I know we've had our differences, but Tyler really wants you there. This could be a chance for all of us to move forward as a family." I studied the invitation for a long time, remembering the little boy who used to visit me for weekends, who I'd taken to baseball games and science museums. Part of me missed that child, missed the relationships I'd thought we had before I understood the transactional nature of their affection. But Tyler wasn't that little boy anymore. He was a young man who had learned that actions didn't have consequences, because Aunt Victoria would always fix his mistakes. He was someone who had been taught that emotional manipulation was an acceptable way to get what you want. He was a product of the system I had helped create, and then finally refused to enable. I sent a card with a polite decline and a generic wish for happiness. No money, no explanation, no opening for further contact. 6 months later, I bought my first house, a beautiful craftsman in the Pearl District, with a view of the mountains and a mortgage I could easily afford, because I'd finally learned to live within my means instead of subsidizing other people's lifestyle. I threw a housewarming party and invited my real friends, colleagues from work, neighbors, people I'd met through yoga and hiking groups, people who liked me for who I was, rather than what I could provide, people who celebrated my successes instead of resenting them, people who understood that healthy relationships were built on mutual respect, rather than financial transactions. As I stood in my new kitchen, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, I realized something profound. I hadn't lost a family when I set those boundaries. I had gained one, a chosen family of people who valued my happiness, respected my decisions, and wanted nothing from me except my friendship. The final contact came 2 years later, in the form of a Facebook message from Tyler himself. He'd found a way around the blocks I'd established, and his message was long and carefully crafted. "Aunt Victoria, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I understand now why you stopped helping us. I'm in a good place now. I have a job. I'm going to community college part-time, and my wife and I are expecting our first baby. I wanted to thank you for forcing me to grow up, even though I hated you for it at the time. I also wanted to apologize for the things my mom and uncle did. I didn't know about the lies they told or the harassment they put you through until much later. I hope someday we can have a relationship that's not about money or drama. I miss my aunt." I read the message 3 times, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden requests. But Tyler's words felt different from the family communications I'd received before. There was accountability rather than blame, gratitude rather than entitlement, respect for my boundaries rather than attempts to violate them. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat with the message for several weeks, thinking about what kind of relationship might be possible with someone who had genuinely learned from their mistakes, someone who understood that love wasn't measured in dollars and that family relationships required mutual respect. Eventually, I sent a brief response. "Tyler, I'm proud of the progress you've made. When you're ready for a relationship that's based on genuine connection rather than financial support, reach out again. I'm open to that possibility." He didn't respond immediately, and I respected that. Real change takes time, and healthy relationships can't be rushed or forced. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the possibility of having a family member who valued me as a person, rather than as a source of funding. Today, 3 years after that first moment of clarity in my darkened bedroom, I live a life that feels genuinely mine. I've been promoted twice more. I'm in a relationship with someone who supports my goals rather than resenting my success, and I have a savings account that grows every month instead of being constantly depleted by other people's emergencies. More importantly, I've learned to recognize the difference between helping and enabling, between love and manipulation, between family and people who happen to share your DNA. I've discovered that saying no to toxic behavior isn't selfish, it's self-preservation. And I've learned that the people who truly love you will respect your boundaries rather than punishing you for having them. The voice in my head that first spoke up that night has become a permanent part of my decision-making process. It reminds me to question emotional manipulation, to trust my instincts about people's motivations, and to prioritize my own well-being instead of constantly sacrificing it for others' comfort. When people ask me about my family now, I tell them about my chosen family, the friends who have become my support system, the colleagues who celebrate my achievements, the partner who encourages my growth. I don't talk about the relatives who taught me that love isn't conditional on financial support and that healthy relationships require mutual respect. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd continued the old pattern, if I'd bailed Tyler out that night and maintained the system that was slowly destroying my financial and emotional well-being. I probably would have missed the career opportunities that changed my life. I definitely would have continued enabling behavior that prevented my family members from developing genuine self-sufficiency. And I almost certainly would have ended up broke, exhausted, and resentful, giving more and more to people who appreciated it less and less. Instead, I learned one of the most important lessons of my adult life. When people say you're becoming a problem for having boundaries, the solution isn't to eliminate the boundaries. The solution is to remove those people from access to the assets they're trying to control. I solved the problem by removing them from my assets, and in doing so, I saved not just my financial future, but my sense of self-worth, my emotional well-being, and my understanding of what family really means. The best part is that I sleep peacefully every night, knowing that I'm finally living for myself instead of subsidizing other people's poor choices. The voice in my head is quiet now, because I've learned to trust my own judgment and protect my own interests. And for the first time in my adult life, I'm genuinely excited about the future I'm building, a future that belongs entirely to me. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 years after I'd first refused to bail Tyler out of jail. I almost threw it away without opening it, assuming it was another attempt at manipulation or guilt, but something about the handwriting stopped me. It wasn't Rebecca's familiar scrawl, or Marcus's aggressive block letters. This writing was careful, deliberate, almost hesitant. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Tyler's name at the bottom, but the words that filled the page were unlike anything I'd ever received from my family before. "Aunt Victoria," it began, "I'm writing this letter by hand because I wanted you to know how much thought I've put into every word. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not trying to manipulate you or guilt you into resuming contact. I'm writing because I owe you an apology that's 3 years overdue, and because I finally understand what you were trying to teach me." The letter went on to describe Tyler's life since our last contact. He'd completed a substance abuse program entirely on his own, worked his way up from dishwasher to line cook at a local restaurant, and was taking night classes at the community college while supporting his wife and newborn daughter. But more than the external changes, he wrote about the internal transformation that had happened when he finally stopped expecting other people to solve his problems. "The hardest part wasn't the financial struggle or even facing consequences for my mistakes," he wrote. "The hardest part was realizing that I'd never actually grown up, because someone was always there to catch me when I fell. When you stopped being my safety net, I had to learn how to not fall in the first place. That was the greatest gift you ever gave me, even though I hated you for it at the time." What struck me most was his acknowledgement of the manipulation campaign his mother and uncle had waged against me. "I didn't know about the lies they told about me being suicidal, or the harassment, or the attempts to sabotage your career until much later. When I found out, I was horrified. What they did wasn't love or family loyalty, it was abuse designed to control you. I'm ashamed that my poor choices gave them the ammunition they used against you." The letter concluded with something I'd never expected to see from any member of my family: complete accountability without expectation of reward. "I'm not writing this because I want our relationship back. though I'd be honored if you ever decided you were open to that possibility. I'm writing because you deserve to know that your refusal to enable me wasn't cruelty, it was the push I needed to become the person I was always capable of being. Thank you for caring enough about my future to let me fail in the present. I sat in my kitchen reading the letter 3 times, searching for hidden manipulations or ulterior motives, but finding none. This felt different from every other family communication I'd received over the years. There was no request for money, no attempt to guilt me into resuming contact, no suggestion that I owed him anything, just genuine accountability and gratitude. For the first time since cutting contact with my family, I felt something other than relief or anger. I felt curious. Had Tyler really changed as dramatically as his letter suggested? Was it possible that someone could break free from the patterns of entitlement and manipulation that had defined my family for so long? I decided to do something I hadn't done in 3 years. I researched my nephew's life, not to spy or judge, but to verify the claims he'd made in his letter. A quick search of public records showed that he'd indeed completed a court-mandated substance abuse program, had been steadily employed at the same restaurant for 18 months, and had no arrests or legal troubles since that final incident 3 years ago. More telling were the small details I found through mutual acquaintances. Tyler had quietly paid back several family members who had loaned him money during his crisis period. He'd turned down offers of financial help from friends when his daughter was born, choosing instead to work extra shifts to cover medical expenses. He'd declined invitations to events he couldn't afford rather than asking others to subsidize his social life. These weren't the actions of someone performing temporary good behavior to win back a financial benefactor. These were the habits of someone who had genuinely internalized the concept that adults are responsible for solving their own problem. A month later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I sent Tyler a brief response. Thank you for your letter. I'm proud of the changes you've made. If you're ever interested in rebuilding our relationship on new terms that don't involve financial support in either direction, I'm open to exploring that possibility. His response came within a week, and it was exactly what I'd hoped to see. I would love that more than anything. Would you be willing to meet for coffee sometime? My treat. I finally learned how to budget for small luxuries. That last line made me smile. The old Tyler would have suggested an expensive restaurant and expected me to pay. This Tyler was offering to buy coffee within his own means, treating it as the luxury it had become for him. It was a small detail, but it spoke volumes about how fundamentally his relationship with money and responsibility had changed. We met on a Saturday morning at a small cafe near my house. I arrived first and watched through the window as Tyler approached the building. He looked different, older, certainly, but also more solid somehow. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had learned to depend on himself rather than the anxious energy of someone constantly looking for their next rescue. When he walked in and saw me, his first words weren't about how good it was to see me, or how much he'd missed. Instead, he said, "Thank you for being willing to meet with me. I know I don't deserve your time, but I'm grateful you're giving it to me anyway." We talked for 2 hours, and I found myself genuinely enjoying his company for the first time since he was a child. He told me about his job, his pride in being able to support his family, his plans for slowly working toward a degree in culinary art. He asked about my life, my career, my relationship, questions that showed genuine interest in me as a person rather than assessment of my financial capacity to help him. Most importantly, he never once mentioned money, not his struggles with it, not his successes in managing it, not any future plans that might require it. The conversation stayed focused on relationships, goals, personal growth, and family, the kind of family conversation I'd forgotten was possible. When it came time to leave, Tyler picked up the check without drama or fanfare, leaving a generous tip that I noticed but didn't comment on. As we walked toward our cars, he said something that moved me more than I expected. "I know this is probably going to sound weird, but cutting me off was the most loving thing anyone in our family ever did for me. It took me a long time to see it that way, but I'm grateful now." That conversation became the foundation for a completely new relationship. We began meeting monthly for coffee, then occasionally for dinner at restaurants. Tyler chose based on his budget rather than my ability to pay. He introduced me to his wife and daughter, not as the rich aunt who might provide financial assistance, but as family he wanted to share his life with. The most remarkable thing about our rebuilt relationship was how different it felt from every family interaction I'd had before. There was no underlying tension about money, no calculating looks when I mentioned work successes, no casual request disguised as conversations. Tyler seemed genuinely happy about my achievements without seeing them as opportunities for himself. 6 months into our renewed relationship, he did something that shocked me. He asked for my advice about a financial decision, not money itself, but guidance on whether he should take on additional debt to accelerate his education or continue his slower pay-as-you-go approach. I helped him create a budget spreadsheet and walk through the pros and cons of each option. In the end, he chose the more conservative path, deciding that financial stability was more important than speed. But what struck me most was that he asked for my wisdom, not my wallet. He valued my experience and judgment, not my bank account. The contrast with the rest of my family became even more stark during this period. Rebecca and Marcus continued their sporadic attempts at contact, but their approaches remained fundamentally unchanged. Rebecca's messages still followed the same pattern: brief personal updates followed by subtle or direct requests for financial assistance. Marcus's communications alternated between attempted manipulation and outright hostility when manipulation failed. My mother's calls had settled into a routine of guilt-laden updates about family members' struggles, always delivered with the underlying message that I could solve these problems if I chose to. She never directly asked for money anymore, but every conversation was structured to make me feel selfish for having financial security while others struggled. The difference between Tyler's approach and the rest of the family's was like the difference between day and night. Tyler had learned to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The others remained trapped in transactional thinking, unable to conceive of family connections that didn't involve financial exchange. This contrast became crystal clear during what should have been a joyful family announcement. My cousin Janet called to tell me she was getting married and wanted to invite me to the wedding. The conversation started pleasantly enough, with genuine excitement about her engagement and happiness about her future, but within minutes it devolved into the familiar pattern. "The wedding is going to be pretty expensive," Janet mentioned casually. "We're trying to keep costs down, but you know how it is. Everything wedding-related costs 3 times what you expect." I waited, knowing what was coming. "We're not asking family for money or anything," she continued, "but if anyone wanted to contribute to our honeymoon fund instead of giving traditional gifts, we wouldn't say no. I mean, we know you've done really well for yourself and we'd rather have an amazing honeymoon than another toaster, you know?" There it was, the same old playbook dressed up in modern language. The honeymoon fund request that wasn't really a request, the casual mention of my financial success, the suggestion that my contribution would be more meaningful than a traditional gift. It was manipulation too, updated for contemporary sensibilities, but fundamentally unchanged. I declined politely, sent a traditional wedding gift from their registry, and didn't attend the wedding. Janet's response confirmed that nothing had really changed. She was hurt and confused by my selfishness, couldn't understand why I'd become so tight with money, and felt that I'd lost touch with what family meant. The incident reinforced my understanding that Tyler's transformation was exceptional rather than typical. Most people who become accustomed to financial rescue never learn to function without it. They may temporarily modify their approach when their usual tactics stop working, but they rarely undergo the fundamental mindset shift that genuine independence requires. Tyler, on the other hand, had done the hard work of completely restructuring his relationship with money, responsibility, and family. He'd learned to find satisfaction in his own achievements, rather than seeking validation through other people's resources. He'd discovered that genuine relationships were built on mutual respect, rather than financial transactions. As our relationship continued to strengthen, I realized that Tyler had given me something I'd never expected to receive from a family member: proof that change was possible. His transformation from entitled teenager to responsible adult hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy.
but it had been real, sustainable, and complete. This realization helped me process some of the lingering guilt I carried about cutting contact with the rest of my family. Tyler's success proved that my refusal to enable poor behavior hadn't been cruel, it had been necessary. The family members who remained stuck in cycles of manipulation and entitlement weren't there because I'd been too hard. They were there because they'd chosen not to do the difficult work of change. A year after Tyler and I reconnected, he called with news that brought our relationship full circle. He'd been accepted into a culinary arts program at a respected local college, with partial scholarship funding that would cover most of his tuition costs. He'd saved enough to cover the remaining expenses without taking on debt, and he was planning to continue working part-time while attending school. "I wanted to tell you first," he said, "because this wouldn't have been possible if you hadn't forced me to grow up. I never would have developed the work ethic or financial discipline to make this happen if someone had been subsidizing my life all these years." As I listened to him describe his plans and his excitement about his future, I felt something I'd never experienced before: genuine pride in a family member's accomplishments that had nothing to do with my contribution. Tyler had earned this opportunity through his own effort, discipline, and growth. His success belonged entirely to him, and I could celebrate it without any of the complex emotions that had colored family achievements in the past. The contrast with how family successes used to feel was profound. When Rebecca or Marcus had achieved anything positive in the past, my pride had always been mixed with resentment about how much of my money had made their success possible. When they failed, I felt responsible for not doing enough to help. Every family milestone had been tainted by the transactional nature of our relationships. With Tyler, I could feel pure happiness about his achievements because they were genuinely his. I'd contributed wisdom and encouragement during our rebuilt relationship, but I hadn't funded his success or enabled his poor choices. He'd done the work himself, and his accomplishments meant something because they'd required genuine effort and sacrifice. This experience taught me something important about the difference between healthy and unhealthy family support. Healthy support involves offering guidance, encouragement, and emotional backing while allowing people to face the natural consequences of their choices. Unhealthy support involves removing consequences and solving problems that people should handle themselves. Tyler's transformation had been possible precisely because I'd stopped providing unhealthy support and started modeling healthy boundaries. When he was ready to change, he'd had to develop genuine skills rather than simply finding new ways to access financial rescue. The result was lasting growth that belonged to him rather than temporary stability that depended on someone else's resources. 3 years after Tyler and I reconnected, our relationship has become one of the most rewarding parts of my life. We talk regularly, share holidays together, and support each other through challenges in the way that healthy family members do. His daughter calls me Aunt Victoria, and genuinely lights up when she sees me, not because I bring presents or money, but because I'm a consistent, caring presence in her life. Most importantly, Tyler has become someone I genuinely like and respect, not just someone I love out of family obligation. He's thoughtful, hardworking, and principled. He treats his wife with respect, raises his daughter with patience and wisdom, and contributes positively to his community. He's the kind of person I would choose to have in my life, even if we weren't related. The other family members remain distant, not by my choice but by the natural consequences of their unwillingness to change their approach to relationship. They continue to view my boundaries as punishment rather than self-protection, my success as selfishness rather than achievement, and my refusal to subsidize their lives as abandonment rather than healthy limit. But Tyler's transformation has shown me that family relationships can be rebuilt on healthy foundations when both people are willing to do the work. It's proven that love doesn't require financial support, that respect can be earned and maintained, and that family bonds can be stronger when they're based on genuine affection rather than transactional necessity. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the years of estrangement from Tyler, if I wish I'd found a way to maintain contact while still setting boundaries with the rest of the family. The answer is no. Tyler needed to experience complete independence to learn who he could become without financial rescue. Our current relationship is possible precisely because he went through that period of struggle and growth without my support. The clean break forced him to confront his patterns and develop new ones. If I'd maintained partial contact or provided limited support, he might never have been motivated to change so completely. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop helping them avoid the consequences that will teach them to make better choices. Today, Tyler and I have the kind of family relationship I'd always hoped was possible, but never thought I'd experience. It's built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared values rather than financial dependence and emotional manipulation. It proves that family doesn't have to be the source of stress and resentment that mine had been for so many years. Most importantly, Tyler's transformation has validated my decision to prioritize my own well-being over family comfort. By setting boundaries and protecting my assets, I didn't just save my financial future, I created the space for healthy relationships to develop with family members who were capable of growth and change. Not everyone in my family was capable of that growth, and that's not my responsibility to but Tyler was, and our rebuilt relationship is proof that sometimes the best thing you can do for the people you love is to stop rescuing them and start believing in their ability to rescue themselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.